Welcome to Workin It Out with Dr. V. Today's guests will be Millennials, Emma, Christman, and Ray Parr, with co-host Norman Bailey. Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.
Welcome to Workin It Out on HUR Voices, Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver. You know me as Dr. V, your host of the show. And I have with me my esteemed co-host, Norman Bailey.
Hey, be back again. Doing it one more time.
I just love doing this show with Norman.
It's so much fun.
And today we're at part 2 of our show. And as you know, our show is focused on helping our listeners triumph over workplace stress. And for the last 2 weeks, we really have been focused on the millennial generation. That generation that was born in 1981 and 1982. And they really come with a very unique perspective that has been really, I think, invigorating for the workplace, but also challenging.
Yes.
So I think about myself as a baby boomer, Norm. I think you're like, Norm's a baby boomer. There's certain things about the millennials that we kind of grit our teeth. Like, okay,
watch out.
Watch out. But in the course of doing that, really is challenged, I know for me personally, to say, what are the things I need to be thinking about differently, doing differently, to really make sure that I'm really creating the kind of relationships with this millennial generation that, in fact, in 2 years is going to be the majority generation in the workforce. I think the data says 60%, Norm,
Indeed,
of the workforce is going to be comprised of millennials. I mean, we're going to have 60%, 6 out of 10 people in our workforce will be under 30.
Man, you're talking about a change in the place.
You're talking about change in the place. We're already seeing that in terms of the kind of innovation that millennials have brought, the kinds of expectations that they have about being a member. We talked about Todd Corley last week, and he talked about the assumptions that millennials have when they come into the workforce that they are already a member.
Absolutely.
Whereas in our generation, you had to earn the right to be a member. And that's a totally different dynamic there.
Totally different vibe.
This has been incredibly insightful conversation. I'm looking forward to having even some more up close and personal conversations with 2 millennials that
we're going to hear from the source.
We're going to hear from the source. So it's one thing for people, baby boomers and Gen Xers, to talk about millennials, but we want to hear from the millennials around what is the reality of your life. And as you think about growing and advancing your careers, what are some of the stressors that you feel? Because, again, we want to make sure that we're identifying what are those workplace stressors that can get in the way, and that we can provide more support from our show to our listeners, as well as prepare organizations to really get on top of this. Norm, you have anything?
Well, again, it's just been an exciting topic, because, again, this is one that's surely needed when we talk about that population and sea change. We've seen it. You talked about it at the firm. We see it when we're out there with clients, really trying to get a grasp of how do we do this and retain these folks, because this is the high-value talent that they need. So,
exactly.
So getting it from the source today is going to be huge.
And so we have as 2 guests on our show, Miss Emma Christman. And Emma is a community outreach manager who works for Mobile Futures, and she's got to tell us what that's all about. And then I also would like to say hello to Ray Parr, who is a consultant with Deloitte Consulting here in Washington, D.C. metro area. Good morning, afternoon, whatever time zone our listeners are in. Hi to both of you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Emma, tell us a little bit about you, starting with your age.
Well, I'm 24.
Okay.
And as you said, I'm the community outreach manager for Mobile Future, which is an association of tech companies. We work on policy and mobile startup companies.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do as a community outreach manager? What's your role in that?
I manage all of our membership, all of our diversity and tech outreach, and all of our startup communication.
Okay, great. So let me ask you, and I'm going to ask this also of Ray. How many jobs have you had as a millennial?
Including internships?
Well, no, let's say paid jobs.
Paid jobs, right.
This is my second paid job.
Okay.
You got to catch up, but Todd did. Let me tell you about this, right?
The reason I ask that because the data suggests that millennials will have at least 6 to 8 jobs before they're 35. And so we're curious in terms of, how does that cycle represent itself for you. So you have 2 paid jobs and you're just 24. Wow,
she's well on the path.
She's well on the path, right? I'd like to also say hello to Ray.
Hello, Dr. B.
How are you?
I'm doing really good.
So tell us a little bit about what you do at Deloitte.
So I recently started Deloitte. I'm a senior consultant in the federal practice. So I've been there a little over 7 months. Before that, I worked at the Office of Personnel Management as a personnel psychologist.
That's OPM, right?
OPM, correct. And I think to your point in the question of how many jobs, I'm 30 years old and I've already had 5 jobs. So
You've already had 5.
Oh, you got to catch up.
Yeah, so I mean 5 years. Hey, I'm almost there. So
tell me about it. You've had 5 jobs. You're 30 and you've had 5 different jobs. So what was that about? Was that aspirational in terms of going from one role to another, or were there dynamics that were happening in some of those workplaces that you said, hey, I had enough?
I think it's a combination of the 2 things that you brought up. One is things that were going on in the organization, and then the other piece is internal, my aspiration. So I worked at a nonprofit, and they wanted me to stay, and I was completing my graduate degree, and I was like, this is great. I love the mission, but I didn't really see growth opportunity for me there, so I left that. I also worked at the U.S. Coast Guard in Yorktown, Virginia. Okay. And I think that one was more of a culture difference. I mean, there's some argument between the defense agencies and saying, what is the Coast Guard really military? But wow. I beg to differ. But it was a great experience, but it was in the middle of nowhere. And I think that was the thing that kind of shunned me away. OPM was a great experience. I love the people that I worked with. But because of the situation with the government, a lot of folks tend to be a lot older. There was less opportunities for me to lead, and I really wanted the opportunity to lead. Wow. And so this is kind of what drawn me to Deloitte. And so that's where I'm at right now. So
are you finding the opportunities to lead at Deloitte?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
In what way?
So already I'm the lead for FedBat, the analytics team. So I have a group of 7 folks under me. We're focused on how we go to market on improving engagement for government agencies. I'm also involved with the D&I community of practice. So looking at ways that we can develop business. I'll have 3 people who are on the team with me as it relates to that. I had the similar kind of opportunities in the government, but it was more ad hoc. So this is more, and I think Deloitte is a little bit more multi-generational than the government, which tends to have a lot of older folks comparatively.
One thing that strikes me as I'm listening to you in the comparison and the reference you made with the federal government, is it that Deloitte has sought you out in these leadership situations versus you having to seek the leadership?
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
So I think that, and I don't know if that's just a cultural difference with the government, but it definitely. One of the things that I heard when I was there, and so this is anecdotal, but when I was at the government, is that there was a little bit pushback from the idea of millennials being very jumpy, like, oh, they want to do this and they want to change this and they want to change that, and they've only been there for a year or 2 years.
They paid them dues yet.
They haven't, exactly. To that point, they haven't paid their dues yet. So why they're trying to change all the stuff that's going on, and we've been doing it this way for such a long time. Wow. Versus where in Deloitte, they're seeking you out because there's so many opportunities. They're like, hey, we know you're great for this. You should do this. Wow. Hey, if you want to change something, go ahead. If, just do your research and make sure, that there is going to be a return on investment. And I think that's a combination also of the culture differences of the federal government versus private.
Well, let me ask you, Emma, because you're nodding your head. Have you seen a schism between say older generational people like myself and Norman who have a desire to, maybe not necessarily that's true for me and Norman, but people in older generations who want to kind of keep things as they are, do things as they are, versus really opening themselves up to the new experiences and new perspectives of millennials. Have you seen that?
I think definitely with my previous internships and work experiences, I think some people are afraid of change, and they think it's scary because it's change, and this new way is not as good as the old way. But sometimes it's more efficient, and sometimes the old way works. Like if it's not broke, don't fix it. But sometimes the new way is more efficient. So I've definitely seen like a lot of resistance.
And how does that resistance show up? I mean, what do people do and say that let you know that they're not really supportive of what you're suggesting or want to go in that direction? How does it show up?
I think sometimes maybe in the boardroom when like younger people, millennials, they call us, we'll get shut down, or they'll be like, no, let's just stick to the program, let's stick to the agenda. It doesn't happen. I'm blessed to be at a great organization that allows me to be creative and come out with my great ideas and pitch them. But I think at more structured organizations, they're more like, okay, we're sticking to the plan and we're not going outside of the box today.
Right. And so and I'm asking this to both you and Ray, when you find yourself confronted with people who say, hey, so let's stick to the same way of doing things and let's not think outside of a box, what does that do to you? What does it do to your spirit, to your commitment, to your engagement?
I think it's a drawback sometimes, but I think it's also like a challenge. Like, okay, they don't want to do it this way, so now I have to fight harder. And let me show you some statistics on why this works, and let me show you some other places where this is working. Okay, so you decide to kind of beat them at their own game by showing them some different perspective and some data to compel them to think about it differently. Okay. What about you, Ray? You kind of talked about the fact, I think earlier when you were talking about some of the decisions you made to go to different jobs or different agencies was because sometimes folks just kind of shut you down or didn't want to kind of change and innovate.
Yeah, and so I won't say that about my last employer because it was great, but I think that some of the earlier experiences I did experience that, and I think that's why I also grew out the beard to look a little bit older.
All right.
I think that I think to Emma's point, having data and examples definitely help drive the point. In regards to influencing those decisions, but I think there comes a point where you feel that you've been shot down so many times that hey, I can take this somewhere else, and I think you kind of tell yourself it'll be their loss in that respect. So I think that there was situations where I felt that I could have definitely helped the organization, but they weren't really open to the idea. So I thought it would be best for me to leave. So
okay, well, as you know, part of our commitment in this show is to really look at ways to identify ways to help our listeners cope and triumph over workplace stress. And some of the data suggests that your generation is the most stressed out generation. You're more stressed out than Gen Xers, baby boomers, and the traditionalists who are really ready to retire. So when we come back from break, I want you to tell us about, is that in fact your perception that your generation is very stressed out? And if so, what are those factors that are contributing to that? And then what do we need to be thinking about in terms of how do we support millennials dealing with some of that stress? Because if you're 60% of you, we don't want 60% of our workforce to be stressed out in the next 2 years. So this is Dr. Vanessa Weaver along with my host, Norman Bailey.
Get it done.
And we on Working It Out, HUR Voices. I don't know why I'm having a challenge with this today. With HUR Voices, Sirius XM Channel 141. And we'll be back right after this commercial break.
Share your questions for Dr. V and Norman B by emailing us at drv@workinitoutradio.com or normanb@workinitoutradio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. V, your host of Working It Out, and I have along with me my esteemed co-host Norman Bailey.
Hey, we're holding it down.
And we're holding it down, and we're in part 2 of our conversations about millennials in the workplace. And last week we had Todd Corley, who shared with us some of the facts and figures and some of the experiences that he has had working with organizations around issues with millennials. But today, in this in our studio, we have the real folks here. We have 2 millennials who are very accomplished in their own right. I'd like to welcome back Emma Christman. Emma.
Hi.
Hi.
You.
And Emma is the community outreach manager for Mobile Futures. And then we have Ray Parr.
Hello.
And Ray is a senior consultant with Deloitte Consulting. So thank you all so much for the perspective that you've already shared with us. So before we went on break, we were talking about the fact that a lot of the data suggests that the millennial generation is the most stressed out generation in the workplace. So the four generations, the traditionalists, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and now the millennials, that you all are really having some real major workplace stressors. And I wanted to have you all talk a little bit about that in terms of, are you seeing that? Is that just the data, or is that part of the reality that either you're experiencing, that you see that your peers and friends are experiencing? Emma?
So I am blessed to be in an environment that is a little lower stress than some of my friends that work for certain organizations. But I think it's a lot of factors that contribute to stress. I think, number one, we come out of college with so much student debt that we're looking for the highest paid job that we can find. And we're looking for a place where we can stand out, and we're looking for a place where we can contribute. But it's like so many different factors that are really like affecting us that I think it's like weighing heavy on our shoulders.
So although you said you have a good place where you're working and you feel very blessed with that, are your friends really stressed out? I mean, are they talking about this a lot?
They do.
They do? And how do they talk about it?
Yeah.
I think they feel like they're stuck in a box at some of their jobs, and they've hit the glass ceiling and they just got there.
Oh, I see.
So it's kind of like they can't really advance, or they can't really move up in the company because there are either too many other people that are trying to get the same job as them, or no one's really trying to bring them to the table or actually help them.
Okay, so they're seeing a lot more competition and
Right.
not a lot of support, it doesn't sound like.
Right.
Okay, what about you, Ray?
On mine, I would say that I see a lot of folks that are extremely stressed out, and it is the folks that would fall into the millennial category. And I think that part of it is internal. Part of it is internal and part of it is external. And what I mean by that is the internal piece is that they often take their work with them home. And I think it's fine to, work once in a while on the weekend, but I see a lot of folks, it's almost a badge of honor to say, I've worked Saturday, Sunday, I've put in 60 hours. And so I think part of it is knowing when to leave the work at work and when to bring it at home. So I think that it comes with being able to actually address that issue. But another is the environment, because there's so much work to be done that people, they won't check on you and say, hey, you look a little burned down. Maybe you should take a rest. They'll be like, hey, can you also do this for me? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
You're a great performer. You get it done. And so here's some more stuff that you can do. So I think it's also knowing when to say, hey, I have all these other things going on and I can come back to you. But also, having a flexible workplace helps too. I think Deloitte has a great telework supportive environment. I know OPM also had that, and we're seeing more workplaces integrate telework into there. So I think that that's good. But then there's also, it's a double-edged sword, because it plays into that, when do you shut it down? Because if you waking up literally having dreams of your work, it can be extremely stressful.
So Ray, what do you think is really forcing people, making people want to take it home every night? I mean, what is it? Something internally? Is it an internal drive, or is it pressure that they feel that others are placing on them?
I would say that I think, to Emma's point, that I hate to stereotype and say it's just millennials, but we do want to move up fast. So I think that when I'm really wanting to prove ourselves, and I can do this, I can do it by myself. I think that that's part of it too. That it's on internal pressure, really trying to push yourself. Right. And I think I would also agree to the student loan piece that plays into it, because I'm definitely always looking where I can increase the amount of income so I can pay off all the debt that I have too. So,
well, it's interesting, because some of the data we were talking about last week said that the millennials who have financial stress, they're like 4 or 5 times more stressed than the other millennials. And so you all are both sharing that with us. So let me ask you this. When you see your friends are being stressed out, how do they look and act? I mean, how do you know when your friends are really, really stressed about the workplace? What do they do? You all are smiling with each other. All right. Is this a secret here?
I think you can see it in their face. They say it. They look worn down. They look tired.
Wow. Okay.
They look like Gen Xers.
So they show it.
They show it.
They're not trying to mask it.
No, I think if they're your friends, they show you. But I think in the workplace, you can also like see other people's stress on their face if they're always flustered or they're always trying to move and go somewhere and do this, do that, do that. You can like really see that on people's faces that they're stressed out.
And what about you, Ray?
I think that you can only hide bags so much.
Wow. Wow.
So
you mean bags on your eyes?
Bags on your eyes. So
can't keep them sunglasses on all day. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think that also is a combination of people kind of being vocal with how they're feeling. I think having that support, because they're not going to tell anyone. I think that it's also being close to folks. People communicating that they're burned out, and you see it too when people that you were really close to at an organization, they leave. They're like, hey, what happened to so and so? Oh, they're gone. So I think that that's part of it too, and maybe it's on millennials, but also within the organization to reach out to say before they leave or before it gets to that point to say, hey, I'm starting to feel burned out. Is there any way that we can, is there something that we can do?
Yeah, it's interesting when you listening to you, because what I keep hearing in some of this is a time factor. And I can imagine, some of the baby boomers are saying, well, okay, 4 jobs and he's only 30 and 22 in 2 years. Like, how long did they stay? So when you think about the stress thing, I'm curious, is there like a clock ticking in your head that says, okay, I've been here like 2 days, 2 minutes, and 6 hours, and it's time to go.
It's time to get promoted.
I mean, tell me about how's that working?
I mean, I think if you're working 7 days a week and the person above you works 5 days a week and you have this huge workload, you kind of feel like, oh, I should get something better, or I should get promoted, or I should get a pat on the back or acknowledgement. Okay. I think sometimes it has to do with how much you put in and wanting to be acknowledged or appreciated. And we are also always want to move up. Like we're anxious. Like we want to get better. We want to do better. We want it all like now.
Yes.
So
does technology have something to do with that in terms of the speed at which you want to advance in the organization and get more assignments? Is it this kind of fast-moving technology kind of oriented society we're in?
I mean, I'll buy it. I would say that, I think that that's a function of it. But I'm not one to be, I have, my sister's a little bit younger than me. She's always on the cell phone, texting, Twitter, Snapchat, and all this other stuff. And so I think that there is this idea that the millennial is a now generation. We don't want to wait. We want it now. And I would say that it's part of society. I don't think it's just something that is a function of millennials. I think that our society is moving towards greater instant gratification. And I don't think that that's necessarily the best thing. I don't think it's just the millennials, but I would say that's a function of our society itself.
What could be one or two things you would recommend that organizations do to increase their sensitivity about the pressures that millennials feel to be successful and to have stretching roles and to be a real member of, and even to understand how they move up in an organization? What would you recommend organizations to think about and do?
I think mentorship within the organization and sponsorship within the organization is important, because a lot of times if you talk to someone that's older or more senior in the organization, they can tell you like, hey, look, I was your age, I've been here, don't work the 7 days, work as much as you can in the 5 days. Or I also think it has to do with the environment, like we were talking about earlier, making sure that millennials are comfortable with their workload and also with being able to pitch their ideas.
Okay.
I think that's important.
Thank you. Ray, what would you suggest?
Can I piggyback on what Emma said? I 100% agree that mentorship is probably one of the key factors. And actually, in Deloitte's 2015 Millennial Survey, they did talk about aspirations towards leadership, and it was really important to have that mentor relationship. And I've definitely been blessed in the situation from OPM having a great mentor with Bruce Stewart, and then also in Deloitte having some mentors there. And I can see the value in helping me, one, to kind of balance things as work-life balance, but also get an idea of the culture and the expectations. On another piece of it, I think having clear ideas of what is available as a work-life balance. Because some organizations have some great perks, but it's not always communicated to all employees. For example, some things I think that help is exercising and maybe taking breaks in your lunch to go exercise and stuff like that helps with some of the stress. I know.
Well, that's really interesting because again. And I'll just make a quick point. A lot of the data suggests that those perks that really support work-life balance are not always utilized. That people, and millennials, not only millennials, but baby boomers and Gen Xers, we get so consumed in doing the work that we don't think about how to take care of ourselves. So in our last minute that we have, me and Norma always talk about this, 30 minutes goes by fast.
Yes, indeed.
What would be one tip or one recommendation you would want to tell your friends around how to manage their stress? If there's one thing that you would say to your friends about managing their workplace stress, what would it be?
I would say talk to someone that is more senior or find a mentor.
Okay, thank you.
I say try not to take everything on yourself. It's important to, you also communicate to others, but know that you're a part of a team for a reason. And so figuring out ways that when you're overburdened that you can communicate to someone else and they can help support that.
Thank you both. And Norm, what is your takeaway?
Well, the takeaway, I think what you both said is, again, knowing that you got peers out there that you connect with that's having the same experience. And I was throwing real quick, our previous guest, Star Carley, had a great book that's out, that's Fitch Path, that, if you're looking for some additional information, maybe another good place to look.
Right. So look at your resources.
Yes.
Well, I'm Vanessa Weaver, your host of Workin It Out on HUR Voices, Sirius XM Channel 141. And this session today has been focused on millennials, and I'd just like to thank our two incredible guests, Emma Christman and Ray Parr, for really sharing with us from their heart and from their experience what life is like being a millennial. And I just have no doubt that the suggestions and tips that you gave will be a real value add. So thank you for being here. So on behalf of Norman Bailey and myself, Dr. Vanessa Weaver, known as Dr. V, we'd like to thank you for tuning into our two-part series on millennials in the workforce, and we look forward to connecting with you next week. Have a safe, productive, and happy week.
Email your work-related questions to www.workinitout.com.